Again, sorry, everybody. But thank you, everybody, for joining, all these families. I know this is a really uncertain time, and we're so pleased you could take a little time away from your life right now to work on thinking about how to heal and deal with grief and loss in the midst of this crisis on top of everything else in our life. So I'm going to introduce you to our speaker. Cara Fox is a mother of a child, Julian, who's 12 years old, who lives with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And Cara Fox is a parent advisor. I had it up on my screen and I lost it, Cara, so you can tell people what exactly the title is that you that you manage with for LGS, the Lennox-Gastaut Syndrome Foundation.
Great, thanks, Gabi. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me. You gave me a reason to put some clothes on today. I am actually an LGS ambassador for California through the LGS Foundation, and I am also the administrator, one of the administrators for the LGS Foundation Caregiver Facebook page, and we have over 5,000 members, parents and caregivers and others dealing with LGS around the world. Anyhow, I wanted thank you for having me today. As Gabi said, I'm Cara, and my son Julian has Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And he also has other developmental delays that come along with that. He's still in diapers at 12. He uses leg braces. He's nonverbal. So we've been dealing with grief and loss his whole life. The grief of his life not looking like what we thought it was going to look like, and my life as a parent as well. And I'm sure everybody out there can relate to that, and I'm sure it's going to continue to be that way when he turns 16, not being able to drive, not graduating with his peers, not going to college. These are all things that I've been dealing with for 12 years. And then dealing with the daily seizures and the medications and everything else that goes along with it. So to put that in the current situation with COVID, it makes it really interesting, because I think as caregivers and parents, we've been dealing with isolation and quarantine and all of this for a very long time. And now the rest of the world is joining us. So we are actually quite equipped, I think, as caregivers on how to deal with this. But then you have the added layers of isolation. I'm used to not going out and doing these things, but now having a medically fragile child and an immune compromised child, I have to be extra careful. I'm fearful of even going to the grocery store, and those extra fears of what if he contracts it, what's going to happen? What if I have to go to the hospital for something totally non-COVID related and he contracts it? Filling medications, filling prescriptions, he has one of his seizure medications that needs to be, what's going to happen? And dealing with all of that. And I know a lot of our families have those same fears. So dealing with all of this added frustration on top of the daily seizures and the medications. And then not only that, but my son goes to school, and now there's no school, and there's no school for the rest of the school year. So now I'm not only mom, but I am mom, I am nurse, I am teacher, I am aide, I am all the therapists. I am a team of about 13 people at home doing therapies and doing schooling, on top of, again, dealing with seizures and medications. And I'm also a single mom, so that adds another layer. So it's just me and my son. That's it. And I'm sure a lot of families out there can relate. I personally don't have any nursing or aides at home, but I know a lot of families have had to cut that out, and I know how difficult that has been. But, I'm realizing with all of this added stress, I'm typically a very positive and upbeat person, but it's stressful. It's tough right now. And, I've been dealing with migraines the last few days. My neck hurts. I'm not sleeping well. And I'm learning to listen to my body and being like, okay, I need some self-care. And what does that look like? Self-care normally is difficult, and put that in a COVID situation, it makes it even more difficult. You know, a hot shower is awesome. You know, drinking coffee or tea in my favorite mug helps. And really my saving grace have been my LGS mom friends. Every week, about 13 of us hop on Zoom and talk about our fears and our hopes and what we're going through. And, you know, we have one who's a nurse, and she's fearful, you know, going to work and bringing it back to her son, who also has LGS. So really my saving grace has been my community, and being able to talk to other parents and helping other parents and helping where I can, and trying to find those moments. Really the silver lining in all of this for me has been spending more time with my son. When he has good days, I don't have to share them with anyone else. You know, we get to have more cuddle time, and it's actually been fun doing some of the therapies. While it's been stressful, it's also been really fun when he gets something right, giving him a high five or a fist pump, and being able to share the joy in that. So I'm just trying to find the silver lining in all of this, and you know, making the moments the best that we can, because it's stressful and it's hard, and but we're just trying to do the best we can, and helping other families. And really that's how I'm dealing with the grief and loss, just trying to turn it into a positive. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cara. It's wonderful to hear about how you're taking a positive spin on it. I'm trying to do that every day. I know that there's lots of difficulty in actually doing that, and the self-care falls to near zero levels. But I'm really excited to introduce our panelists for today. Emily and Donna are both licensed clinical social workers at a DC center called the Wendt Center for Loss and Healing, and they'll tell you a little bit more about this incredible resource and the work that they do every day to help families like ours. So, all right, Emily and Donna, you can take it away.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Gabi. It's so good to be with everyone. Like Gabi was saying, my name is Emily Prusator. I am a grief and trauma psychotherapist at the Wendt Center for Loss and Healing. And with me today is Donna Tish, who also works at the Wendt Center. She has significant experience working with couples who are navigating, you know, the grief and trauma that comes along with, you know, taking care of a child who has significant health needs. So I think us together hopefully will be a good team to be able to talk about what does it look like to see this as a grief experience, and also see your entire caregiving experience possibly as a grief experience. And then mostly focusing, hopefully, and what does it look like to find those small slivers of moments for self-care in the midst of all of this. So we're going to try to really weave in some practical ideas throughout the whole time. We'll start out with just a little bit of, you know, kind of the didactic piece and talking about what this grief is and naming it for you all, but then hopefully jumping straight into some practical strategies for everyone. So I'm going to start just by briefly talking about the Wendt Center, and really with our founder. So this is William Wendt. He is our namesake and our founder. His deep belief was that no one should ever have to grieve alone. And the mission of the Wendt Center has really just blossomed from there. We walk alongside people after the worst moments of their lives. And so we help them journey towards healing where we can, in both our office-based settings as well as school, community, and now in the midst of all of this in virtual settings, because we really deeply believe that we should reduce the barriers to mental health care. So we're a nonprofit mental health agency, and that's what we do, is grief and trauma. So I'm just really excited to be with all of you today to hopefully maybe give some language and normalizing to your experience before COVID and now.
Emily,
So,
sorry to interrupt.
Of course.
Just so you know, your screen is sharing both the slide you're on and the next slide. I don't know if you want to, if there's a way you want to.
Thank you, Gabi. I appreciate that. Let me see if I can stop sharing and start over here. We're all learning this together, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's try if I can do this again. How about now?
Let's see. It's coming up. There you go. Perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
And still just the slide?
Yep. Now it's just the first slide.
Great.
Slide.
All right. Back to dear Reverend Wendt here. All right. So let's start first with just what do we mean when we say the words grief? So at the Wendt Center, we talk about grief as an experience and a reaction to any loss. And that's not just due to death. And I appreciate you, Cara, for going ahead and bringing that up. Because grief is any time we have a change or a loss, it's that reaction. And it can be physical, behavioral, social, spiritual, has lots of different components. And it often happens in waves. So there may be days that feel like, you know, you're doing really well, you're on top of it. And then there may be other days where it just comes crashing over you and it feels overwhelming. So keeping that definition in mind, we want to frame both your life before and after COVID, during COVID really, through that grief lens. Donna, you're muted. I don't know if you need to unmute yourself.
I don't think oh,
there you go. I can hear you now.
Cara, I want to really thank you because you articulated so beautifully a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And you also represent the resilience and the drive towards taking actions to take care of yourself during all that you've been dealing with throughout your life as a parent, and also now with the COVID-19 virus upon us. So thank you for just sort of bringing it alive through your own experience. So as we move along here, I guess kind of echoing some of what Cara described to you, we're going to be talking about the losses and the grief that you all have been traveling with much before the virus entered all of our lives. And my clients who are parents of children with rare diseases are really relieved to begin talking about the losses that they're grieving. And you see some of them listed here, and Cara certainly articulated many of them. But naming our difficulties and distress starts to ease the pain and opens a pathway towards choice and change. So it's important for you to talk about it with the people that you trust and with each other. A feeling that every one of my clients have described is a deep sense of isolation. Having a child with a rare disease, as you all know, instead of a more common illness, adds to your feelings of loneliness and isolation because there's not the widespread understanding and empathy for what you and your child and your family is experiencing. And Gabi used the words feeling hopelessly isolated in her welcome letter on the DEE-P Connections website, and my clients have certainly echoed that sentiment. So you see here some of the additional pieces of grief that Cara described about losing your vision of what your child's life and your life might look like, and of course, tremendous never-ending caregiving responsibilities and fears about the survival of your child and the health and safety of your family. So now, on top of all that you're dealing with, the coronavirus emerges, and you're dealing with stay-at-home mandates, homeschooling, working at home. And so all of this has changed your world and added substantial challenges and difficulties. And I'm hearing a lot of frustration and sadness from my clients who work so hard to create a tapestry of supports and accommodations to help their children survive and keep their families together and functioning. So that tapestry may be unraveling now and causing additional caretaking responsibilities to you, less access to medical facilities, visiting nurses, friends and family who might have played key supportive roles in the lifestyle that you put together. And some of these really build towards what we're talking about today in terms of your need to look inward and create action steps for yourself to take better care for yourself.
Thanks, Donna. I think maybe pausing here and putting a name on some of these grief experiences that you have may be helpful. Like I said, we're going to spend a lot more time focusing on some practical suggestions and tools, but I think for some people it can really feel normalizing and validating to hear, oh, this thing that I'm feeling has a name. And so there's a few different types of grief that you know, what you're experiencing might fall under. And the first one that comes to mind is disenfranchised grief. And that's when you're grieving a loss that is not really validated or understood by society at large. And that really is, as Donna was describing, what it's like to be caregiving for a child with significant health needs like all of you. And people may not understand that it's grief because your child is still living. They don't understand how it can be grief if your child is with you. But as Donna mentioned, you're grieving everything you thought that their life and your life could be. Another grief bucket that this might fall into is anticipatory grief. And this applies to both the current COVID crisis as well as your experience raising your children. It might be this sense of something's coming, right? There's going to be something that happens, or there might be a health concern that pops up, and I have to brace myself for that. And we spend some time in anxiety and worrying and anticipating some of those losses that might come in the future. And then finally, I want to touch on traumatic grief just very briefly, because in the midst of COVID-19, and as well as when you have a child with significant health concerns, our bodies hold the weight of that constant fight or flight mode, right? We're constantly ready to spring into action to do what's necessary to take care of ourselves and the people we love. And when you're in that state for a long time, it can really wear and tear on your body. And I'm grateful to you, Cara, for bringing up the migraines and the neck pains, because that's where the trauma lives, is in our bodies. And I'm going to put a picture up on the screen next that might just put a visual to what you might be feeling, both in your caregiving role as well as with COVID. It's like there was this earthquake and the ground shifted. Maybe that's what happened when you got the diagnosis for your child. Maybe that's what happened when the stay-at-home orders went in place. Maybe it's something else that happened, and your world shifted dramatically. And that's that trauma piece, right? But then there's also the anticipatory part where it feels like there's more coming, almost like there was an earthquake and now we're bracing for the tsunami and there's nowhere to run or find shelter. And I know that this image is pretty powerful, so I just want you to sit with that for a minute and just honor that this is how it feels. You know, not all of the pain of this can always be fixed. Sometimes we just have to hold it.
Yeah. And when we think about trauma, there's even another piece that can be contributing to your distress. You know, crisis situations like this can awaken past losses and traumas that maybe you haven't dealt with or grieved sufficiently. So if you notice reactions and feelings like those on this slide, you know, maybe you're more impulsive with your decision making. Maybe you're having a very hard time feeling safe, even in situations where rationally you should feel some sense of safety. Perhaps you're more reactive and creating more conflict in your relationships. If your behaviors and your feelings are much more intense or extreme than you'd expect from yourself in a given situation, that's when you need to take a pause, try to carve out some time to reflect and turn your attention inward, because if you recognize that there are past hurts and losses that are contributing to how you're feeling and acting, that's when you need to talk about this with someone you trust and step up your efforts to comfort and take care of yourself. You know, identifying wounds from the past and doing things to help yourself feel better can really help heal those past wounds and also reduce your distress in the here and now. And some of the things that you see here we'll be discussing more of in terms of specific self-care strategies.
Donna mentioned there too, the possibility of being more reactive in your relationships or seeing increased conflict. And so I want to touch here briefly on this idea of the fact that all of us grieve differently. And so if you're in a relationship, in an intimate relationship, or you have a partner or a spouse who is, you know, co-caregiving with you, you might be going through this grief experience together and realizing that you're facing it in very different ways. And that's totally normal. We work with a lot of people who find it difficult to navigate how one person is grieving in one way and someone else is grieving in another way. And so once again, it can be helpful to put some names to that. At the Wendt Center, we talk about intuitive grievers and instrumental grievers. Those intuitive grievers are ones who really feel the experience in an emotional and somatic way, so in the body, and they're able to express that in a lot of ways to process. For the instrumental grievers, you're going to see a lot more of that internalizing, and the processing is going to happen more through tasks and getting things done, because that experience is much more cognitive for them. And so if you're in a relationship with someone who is grieving with you and you can tell that they grieve differently from you, think about what it looks like to both ask for support for yourself in the way that you grieve and support them in the way that they grieve. So for those intuitive grievers, active listening and really intentional connection, outward signs of connection and presence are really important. For those instrumental grievers, it's going to look like practical information about the grief process. Some of that psychoeducational information about what it looks like to grieve in this situation, and then opportunities to memorialize the things that you've lost. Yeah. Another thing I want to briefly talk about here is the feelings in grief. Donna, did you want to add something? I heard you start speaking.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about some of the big feelings that come up in grief. And as I said before, some of this pain we just hold, because the grief represents the love that we have for whatever it is that we've lost. And so some of it we hold, and then some of it we can tend to some of the suffering. And these are some of those feelings that I see a lot of clients get kind of stuck in, or feel like they're spinning in circles and they're really suffering in that space. So first off, the guilt that comes with grief. And for you all, it might look like these thoughts of, I'm not doing enough for my child, or if my child's health worsens, would that be my fault, right? And so some things to kind of tend to the suffering that comes along with that guilt is journaling and giving yourself the space to fully express those thoughts. Because when we resist those thoughts, they grow and bubble under the surface. But giving yourself the space to express that, whether through journaling or radical transparency with people that can encourage you, but then always having those voices of honest encouragement that can assure you, you are doing an amazing job. You're doing the best you possibly can for your child right now. And Donna's going to lead you through an exercise at the end where you can actually do some of that for yourself. I want to move also to anxiety. I think this one is really present right now with COVID-19 and some of the worries that are increased. Many of you are anxious about your children's health all the time, and now it's just kind of that much higher. So for the anxiety piece, I just encourage you to notice your breathing, and not just for the sake of noticing it, but trying to lengthen that exhale so that the breath out is actually what communicates to our brains that we're safe in this present moment. And so doing some intentional lengthening of that exhale. And if breathing doesn't work for you, maybe it's mantras and encouraging things you can say to yourself to help ground yourself in the present moment. And then there's other grounding techniques that just bring you back to the space. And we'll give some specific examples of that, but it can be as simple as just looking around the room, noticing a few things you see just to come back to the present moment. And the last one's anger. This one's really common in grief, and we don't talk about it enough in our society. I think we talk about, suppressing anger or managing anger, but I really want to encourage folks to find ways to express that anger, because it isn't fair that you have this challenge to deal with, right? Those thoughts of it's not fair are totally justified. So finding ways to express and release some of those feelings rather than just manage those is going to be really important. That might look like exercise, movement, dance, or even some of the work that you all are already doing in advocacy and tangible change that you're making in the world.
Yeah. And there's another kind of experience that is really important for you and your community and my clients who have children with these types of diseases to be aware of. It's called compassion fatigue. And because of the intensity of your caretaking lifestyle and threats to your child's survival, you're at risk for this emotional experience. And basically, it's a deep, deep emotional weariness that can make you feel numb and sap your vitality and aliveness. So be on the lookout for this. When you feel this settling in, it's really time to turn your attention to yourself and step up your self-care efforts. So that means making time for yourself to rest and unplug, seeking opportunities to refresh and enjoy yourself. And something that we don't talk a lot about in our culture, but is so important, is crying with abandon is a great way to release grief and lighten the burden of grief. Some of my clients have particular movies that they watch that they know will help them release tears, or photos that they look at, or things that they read. So these are just some ideas to help you recognize and recover, or begin to recover from compassion fatigue. So we've been talking a lot about self-care suggestions. And as you can see, it's not rocket science, some of these suggestions, but so many of us avoid making the time and space for self-care. So next, let's just look briefly at what might be getting in your way, and what are some of the barriers that are stopping you from doing things that are necessary to help you feel better. And so when I ask my clients what they're doing to relax or recharge or warm up their relationships, they look at me like I've come from another planet and say, Donna, there is no way. I don't have time to care for myself. If I start to slow down, I'll never be able to make it through. I don't have the bandwidth to think about how I'm communicating with my partner to try to warm up through words and actions how we feel about each other. So step one, in terms of these barriers, is just to work at quieting these thoughts and be willing to experiment with a new behavior. In addition to these kinds of barriers, there are more concrete barriers to self-care that might include something that is very hard for caregiving people like most of you, and I and Emily are probably in your tribe in this way, that we might be more comfortable in caretaking roles and find it really difficult to ask people to help us and to be very specific about what we want and need. So that's something that can be a tremendous barrier. And then there's lack of financial resources, energy, and time. So now we'll turn to Emily to talk about how do we begin to do more of this for ourselves.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Donna, because these barriers are real, right? And we have to consider all of them when we're starting out, considering how to really integrate a solid self-care practice into our lives. And so I just encourage everyone to think for a moment, what is realistic, right? Can I give 20 minutes a day? Can I give 2 minutes a day? Think about what are those time limitations, and even 2 minutes a day is doing something for yourself, and remembering that is still self-care. So think for a minute about what are my current limitations. For many of us, that's I can't really leave the house. So thinking about what can I use within the four walls of my home, and what kind of energy do I have to be able to implement this. And then once you've decided kind of where the space is to open up just a little bit of room for self-care, how do you make that commitment? So starting small is the first thing, but then also telling people what your plan is, that they can keep you accountable, is important. We're much more likely to do something if we write it down or we tell someone else our plan to do it. And then those are those people that encourage you, but also hold you accountable to doing that. And then when you are able to take those 2 minutes out of a day to take some time to be present with yourself or do something that's really soothing in the way that Donna was describing, it's important to celebrate that as a victory. It's not one more thing on your to-do list. This is something that you have achieved in honoring yourself and taking care of yourself. Before any of that, though, is possible, it's important to know that we have to first even be connected to ourselves to be able to notice when this is needed. So attuning to our inner world is actually the first step before we even integrate these self-care strategies, because we have to notice when it's needed. So here are just some questions to ask yourself, and I encourage you to consider these and ponder these and possibly take them and journal about them, think about them throughout the day. But first off, what do you notice about your body? Where's the tension residing? Where's some of the heat or tightness or discomfort? How does your body react throughout the day? How does it change? What are the triggers? And then how do you show compassion to yourself? How do you know that you're receiving that compassion? It's not just about self-care as an action, but a stance of self-compassion. So I'm going to lead us through a very brief exercise just to practice this. Practice tuning in to our inner world. I'm going to put up 2 pictures on the screen, and I just want you to watch what shifts. Even the smallest little shift, like your stomach tightening just a little bit, I want you to notice that and just use this as a jumping off point to start doing that throughout your day. So those are 2 pretty different pictures. You may have noticed a change from one to the other. And I just want you to sit with that and notice that feeling, that sense of arousal, and then maybe comfort. And just hold on to the comfort piece and remember that this is possible, right? There's room to come back to this place throughout my day. And we have to first notice when we're in that state of arousal so that we can actually tend to that pain and that suffering.
Yeah. Great. Now, here are a few more self-care ideas for you. And the one that might need a little explanation is mints. And popping a mint into your mouth is something that can just bring your awareness back into your body, into the here and now. If your mind is taking you to other places, if you have distressing thoughts, you can do things with your senses that really bring you back into the here and now. So in addition to popping a mint in your mouth, like Emily said earlier, you can get up and move your body. You might smell a fragrance that you like. You might walk outside and listen to nature sounds. So all this talk, of course, won't make a difference unless you do something and experiment with some things. So in the interest of doing, I'd like you to join me in a quick exercise that I'll ask you to do before we transition into our Q&A session. So to do this exercise with me, I'd like you to begin by closing your eyes, look away from the screen, or look down at the floor, and begin to slow and deepen your breathing. Deepen your breathing so that your abdomen expands when you inhale. And as you breathe, I'd like you to listen to my words with an open mind and an open heart. You're a fiercely devoted parent. You're resilient. You're a survivor. You're strong. You're a maverick. You're courageous. Your experiences have strengthened your ability to survive hardships. Your experiences have opened your heart and deepened your capacities for love, empathy, and service to others. You're a hero. Now, in this moment as you breathe, bring your loving compassion and gratitude to yourself. Just take this time to rest in appreciation for who you have become. Thank you for participating in that with me. And now Gabi will help us answer some questions that you might have sent over in the chat.
I will, while Gabby's pulling those out, I will mention here our website is up on the screen now, and we have a resources page with lots of both COVID related and also grief and trauma related resources. We're really trying during this time of physical distancing to still be connected to the community and sending out resources. So take a look at any of our social media platforms and our website if you want additional resources on grounding, self-care, grief, and trauma. Those are all there and available. Gabi, do we have any questions?
Yeah, so one question is, in particular during this time, when you're kind of stuck in the house with everybody all day and you're getting triggered a lot by issues, like what's something to do to try to help manage getting triggered by people that you're with all the time? I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll answer that maybe in two prongs, and Donna, feel free to add anything that comes up for you. When I'm thinking about caregiving and you know, getting triggered in the family setting, right? Sometimes I often talk to my clients about finding ways to have family grounding techniques, family regulation activities, so things that are done together to bring everyone's energy to a little more of a safe space in that window of tolerance. And I know that many of your kids probably have a lot of physical limitations in terms of what they can participate in, but thinking about what is something we can ritualize together, whether it's right in the morning or just before we start schoolwork or at the end of the day, to help bring everyone's energy to kind of a regulated space. and doing that before we're triggered, right? If we wait until we're triggered to do it, it can be hard to get back into that window of tolerance and that safe place for ourselves. And so making that a part of our rhythms can be really helpful. And then in general and getting triggered, I think it's important to know what you can do with some of those grounding techniques to feel like you're able to come back into the present moment. And I think it always starts with first noticing when you're starting to feel that triggering happening, because it's much easier to help ourselves ground when we're right at the start of that upward slope rather than when we're fully, in that triggered place. Is there anything you would add to that, Donna?
Yeah, I think that, in addition, I think we can expect that in all of our relationships, we are going to have times of what I call maybe rupture, where we trigger each other and there's some distance, some rupture that occurs in the relationship. And so the challenge is repairing that sooner than later. And there are a lot of ways that ruptures in our relationships can be repaired through words, through touch, rubbing a shoulder, hugging somebody. There's something that I call the endorphin hug, which for many of my clients is something that they do. Even if they do it once a week, they feel like they've accomplished something. But it is a full body hug where you stand up with your loved one, your child, your partner, and you hold each other as close as you can so that all of your body parts are touching, and you hold it for 30 seconds. And 30 seconds gives the chemicals in your body, the endorphins in your body, an opportunity to start to activate. And after 30 seconds, there's a feeling of well-being and release. So our words and actions, and we don't have to spend a lot of time letting others know that we care about them and want to repair any of the ruptures that occur when we're all living practically on top of each other. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Gabi? Does that answer your question?
There we go. Sorry,
that's okay.
My screen shifted. So yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah,
I think prevention is the key, right? Yeah. With a lot of these things. Terrific. We've got another question. Let's see, a couple more have come in. The social distancing has opened up a whole world to us in terms of accessibility, with so many virtual options and ways to connect remotely. It has actually felt more inclusive lately for me. I'm anticipating missing these opportunities when things go back to normal, whatever that will be. What concrete things can we do to encourage the virtual world to stay open for people who do not have accessibility in the real world?
That's a great question.
Can I actually talk about that for a second as a parent? I think that we've actually been talking that a lot in the LGS community, because we have a lot of meetups that parents can't get to, right? Because their kids are having seizures, something happens. And we've been doing a lot more virtual meetup for family, and we are actually going to continue that moving forward. And, but I have heard a lot of people say like, oh, now we can do things virtually. Like we had an IEP meeting virtually. There've been other things, and that would be great if that could continue. I think this is a great question. How do we encourage, the people in charge, if you will, to continue this, not just in our community, but beyond?
Right. And I also think some of this is just going to develop naturally out of these circumstances, and it won't go away. For example, the Wendt Center had not been able to provide teletherapy until all of this happened. So now that we have that capacity, I imagine that in some form or fashion that will continue on into the future. So my hope is that our culture will really learn how to make this work. Mm-hmm. People of all kinds in all types of circumstances are having to learn how to make this work. And so I don't think it'll go away. What do you think, Emily?
I agree. Yeah, I found it interesting. There are lots of systems that make it hard to change things, right? Even if it's changed for the better. There are lots of things that are put up in place for some good reasons and some for very crazy reasons, right, that make it hard to make big shifts and change and move into the new century. And I think sometimes a huge crisis pandemic like this can make those changes happen. I know like there are things like licensing requirements that have been relaxed in this situation. So I hope that, you know, some of those systems will see the ways that, you know, services need to be more accessible by providing them in this way. And I just encourage everyone on the call, if you are seeing a therapist through teletherapy, or if you are engaging in IEP meetings, you know, virtually, let the people know how well this is working for you. Because I think sometimes on the other side of it, providers wonder, like, is this as good as it could be? Are they really getting, you know, the support they need in this? And so if it's working for you, let people know that, and maybe that can help them to kind of advocate for it to continue at whatever agency they're working at.
Great, thank you, that's helpful. We have another comment. I resent my family making such a big deal about how hard it is for them to quarantine. They don't know anything about hardship. I have the worst thoughts about them being clueless. They virtue signal constantly about they send food to health workers and that stuff. Any advice on how to deal with this anger? And I think this is something that is recurring, you know, for a lot of people that I spoke with early on. It was a lot of anger about, you know, people, in my case, people coming to me and complaining about how their kid had the flu and it was so draining. And it's like, that's their reality. But yeah, people don't necessarily think about the context of who they're speaking to and the circumstances. So,
well, and I think it's probably incredibly hard to hold space for empathy for that when maybe that empathy hasn't been given to you, right? And in your circumstance already, it's incredibly hard to hear that and you know, and empathize or sympathize, whichever it may be, when you're already dealing with this disenfranchised grief that society hasn't recognized. And so anger makes sense to me as a response, 100%.
Well, and I think like Emily discussed earlier, it's so important to find outlets and safe expressions of that anger because it's justified and it's real, and being able to use ways to express it. You know, the other thing I'm thinking is that even though so many people have been clueless about what your journey has been with all of these challenges that many people are starting to experience, my hope is that there will be more empathy and understanding for what the lifestyle that you've had to live looks like, and there will be more resources that'll make it less isolating and will enable all of us to feel more like a community.
yeah, absolutely. All right, we've got another comment here. Do you have guidance for helping typical siblings deal with grief? We have a 6 and 8-year-old boys, in addition to our 22-month-old DEE sister. They don't seem to be observably grieving yet, though they are certainly aware of sister's daily seizures and challenges. What ages tend to be they tend to be when siblings understand, process, grieve such situations?
Yeah. So one thing I will say is that there are very different ways that grief can look like at different stages. It's very much based on, you know, their developmental understanding of what's going on around them. We often talk about grief in developmental stages. And so understanding that for, you know, a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, it might come out much more in behavior, in tantrums, in maybe even some clinginess, proximity seeking, things like that. It's not always going to look the way that we tend to expect it to. And it also may be that, you know, they see you as a caregiver as such a secure base that they know that they're grounded in you, and that you're keeping them safe and you're keeping their sister safe, and they're able to come back to that. And so I always encourage parents not to worry too much about if their kids are grieving the right way. Kids are often actually much better at grieving than we are. They tend to be able to step into the grief and then step out of it, because our bodies can only take so much grief at once. And so I just encourage folks to really trust their kids, notice what's happening, you know, make room for at times some regression in grief, and then at times for things to seem pretty normal, because that's how kids really do this process. They step in and out of it in pretty beautiful ways, actually.
Yeah. Yes. And I think from the perspective of the parents, it's also so important for you to be modeling what grief looks like, and that grief is okay, and help them sort of normalize by seeing you experience and express grief, seeing you cry, seeing you encourage their full range of emotions. So you can also model and help children gain more comfort with these emotions that they might not know what to do with.
Great. I've had some people in another group that I talk about ask or kind of look for guidance about kind of snapping at their children, like losing their patience and kind of being more on edge. And I don't know if you have maybe some techniques or advice about how to try to catch yourself, or just how to kind of process that and try to limit the ways we take out our exhaustion and frustration on the little ones.
Yeah. Do you want to start, Donna, or me?
I'm still thinking about it. Do you have, I mean, I'm thinking,
Sure.
okay.
I can say a few things, and I think it actually fits well into what you were just talking about. First off, it's normal, right? Parents are humans, caregivers are humans, and we all have a certain range of ability to stay regulated. There's going to be times where you are at the end of your rope and you're frustrated, and it makes sense. So I think first, having compassion for yourself when it's there. And then I often think about this as an opportunity to model for our kids, right? And so, like Donna was saying, when you feel yourself getting to that edge point, being able to have a practice of saying, you know what, Mom, Dad is feeling a little bit on edge right now. I'm going to take a minute to take a deep breath before we keep talking about this, right? And in that way, you are both showing your child that it's normal to have these big feelings, and you're modeling a way to kind of manage those big feelings, and using that language of, I'm having some big feelings right now. And so that they know they can say it to you, and also give yourself just a minute of pause before responding. Easier said than done, obviously. When we're at that height of being triggered, it's a lot harder to do it. But if you put that into practice, anytime there's bigger feelings coming up, it can add that rhythm to just your normal exchanges with your children.
Right. And I think it's also important to acknowledge and apologize when you feel like your behavior has not been what you would hope it would be with your children. To be able to go back later and say, I'm really sorry. I don't want to talk to you like that, and I hope you understand. And to help children also learn that we're not going to be perfect, but that we can go back and repair and make amends with people.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I've personally found that myself. I think my leash is a lot shorter these days. This just, having released our nursing care and kind of being on duty all the time with both kids. And it's just, trying to juggle 17 things and then snapping at kids. So I've been thinking more and more about kind of going back and finding a way to use that as a learning opportunity, right, for children too. It's like, because we reprimand them for lashing out at us and teach them how to fix the situation, but we can play that role too. So
absolutely.
There's another question about if there are any particular resources for fathers. Someone mentions that their husband turned to alcohol as their way of coping and dealing, and that it's obviously not a constructive way. So if you know of any resources in particular for dads and fathers.
Can you think of any off the top of your head, Donna?
I mean, there are men-only support groups that sometimes are specific to families that are struggling with particular diseases or particular illnesses. I don't have any immediate thoughts about that. Do you, Emily?
Yeah, nothing specific comes to mind. And I think that reveals that there's a gap there for sure in terms of honoring the role that fathers play and seeing, kind of sometimes the specific struggles that come up there. And I think we live in a world that unfortunately believes that only one gender can have outward expressed emotions, right? And so often, when you identify with the male gender, you're going to do more of that internalizing. And so I think it's about battling some of those stigmas and ideas about it. But I can definitely do some looking and asking around and see if there's anything specific. And I think it would be interesting too to explore some of that now that everyone's at home together. What does it look like to explore what your role as a father, as a mother, or these different identities looks like?
Right, and for the person who was asking the question about alcohol use, I'd also encourage her to consider becoming involved in maybe Al-Anon or another 12-step program that might provide her with support if his alcohol use continues and appears to have an addictive quality to it.
Yeah, thank you. It's it no doubt makes an already challenging situation even more challenging.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
A couple more questions coming in. Someone is mentioning that another piece that's been really hard is the unequal division of labor in the house when both parents are home all day and working from home, and there's the typical siblings plus a child who's got extra challenges and feeling like they have to be superhuman and do everything, even more so than in the normal times. So if there's any advice on how to explore all of this when emotions are high.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my advice would be all past behaviors, all past rules are off the table in this crisis. I think, to bring the family together and say, okay, however we've been doing things in the past is not relevant. And as a family, we have to make some decisions and some agreements about how we are going to live in this very stressful and unreal life that we're having to navigate.
Absolutely. It's like you're starting a new family all over again because the whole context has shifted. And so those norms and expectations, we kind of have to start from scratch.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, which I'll paraphrase. Can you talk a little bit more about the guilt of not doing enough when there's endless assistance that our children need around education and caretaking and all of that? Just a little bit about how to fight off some of that guilt of.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in, but I know Emily can add to this also. But I think that requires like a continuous practice because those feelings might always crop up. And so developing more compassion for yourself, more motivation to take care of yourself, and developing a practice of reminding yourself that you've done enough, it's okay to rest. If I'm not taking time for myself, I won't survive to help my child and my family. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's one solution. I think it's more of a practice that we all have to learn to repeatedly remind ourselves and to talk back to that voice and say, I'm not going to feel guilty about this. This is my time. This is about me, and I need to take this time for myself to be the person I want to be in my family. So Emily, you jump in here.
Sure. Yeah. Not much to add to that, but I think what Cara brought up at the very beginning, I think really speaks here of this listening to your body. And I think many of us who are caregivers have gotten into the practice of ignoring our bodies and of almost even resenting our bodies for the limitations they pose to doing even more, right? For even more caregiving and sacrificing for other people. And so I think reframing that and saying, if I'm hitting a wall here, that's my body's wisdom talking to me. That's my very wise inner self saying, you need to take a break. And so I think maybe even doing a little of stepping back and noticing our posture towards our bodies and towards our limitations, and having some gratitude too for our bodies for communicating to us in that way.
Yeah, no, it all keeps coming back to self-care as a central part of being able to serve our families as best we can. And I know we struggle with that all the time, speaking from personal experience, but, trying to really use this as an opportunity to really build that practice. Well, thank you so much to Emily and Donna and Cara for being with us today and sharing your wisdom and experiences. This has been incredibly helpful for me, and I imagine quite a number of us. There's some thank yous coming in over the chat as well. This is really wonderful, and we're so grateful that you were able to take time away from your busy schedules to be with us. And your caregiving, for all these families. Thank you for taking time away from your intense caregiving to think a little bit about how to better manage ourselves and our families throughout this chaotic pandemic. There's a lot.
Let's name that as a victory, right? Of taking some time to sit and be on this webinar. You took an hour out of your day today.
Right. And I'm sure many of us were multitasking and doing a lot of things. But, the thing is you can go back and watch this again later. We'll be having the webinar will be up online at our website, deepconnections.net, within 48 hours. We'll have some additional resources that we'll link on the page as well, including the Wendt Center, so you can see what resources they have available. And we'll do our best to make sure you have links to as many useful resources as possible to help you during this time. We also have a COVID-19 resources page that has a lot of other webinars that our partners have put on about a range of topics, therapies and education and all these kinds of things. And we have a couple of other webinars coming up as Deep Connections. We have one at the end of the month on genetic testing and genetic reports, learning how to read your genetic testing reports, what questions you should be asking, when is it time to do some reanalysis, and we'll be joined by someone from Invitae who will talk about the work that they do, and a genetic counselor who can help answer questions. And then we'll have one in May that's about improving the quality of epilepsy care for our rare disease children, with Anoop Patel, who is a leader in this and a neurologist. So please go ahead and follow us and like us and share us and all of those things so you can see more about what else we have planned. We're still looking into some additional COVID-19 resources to bring to you. We welcome suggestions if you have a topic that you think would be really helpful. And we thank you again for your time, everyone, and stay safe and sane.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.